Allahu, 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 Allah, Allahu, 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 Allah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Global Issues on Al-Hikmat TV 24/7 online. It is indeed a pleasure and honor to have with us in Al-Hikmat studio Dr. Michael Lanigan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for including me in the extended family today.
It is always a pleasure to have you with us, have you visit us here at Al-Hikmat studio, to be with us. And I'm sure that our audience out there, we got an audience worldwide, they would definitely benefit from a lot of your advice and your experience and whatever you have to share with them. So our viewers out there, it's a pleasure to have you viewing this program, and I want to let you know that Dr. Michael Lanigan is a man of great experience. He has traveled throughout the world, Indonesia, all over the United States of America, India, the Philippines, Australia, you name it, east, west, north, and south. He's a man with a lot of love, a lot of affection for people. He's all about peace. He's all about connecting people through peace and love. So, in addition to his love and his peace, you'll be amazed to know he also has a very political background, because that's what he used to teach. Am I correct, sir?
In fact, I still try to teach it.
And he still teaches politics. So he's a man of different walks of life. Professor, doctor, professor at Miami-Dade College here, of course, in Miami, which he considers to be a different world, close to America. I like that. So stay tuned and let's get right into this topic of Dr. Lanigan's experience, his knowledge, all about love and peace and connecting people through peace. So welcome again to the show, Dr. Lanigan.
Thank you so much for having me. As I've shared with you before, I feel like you're a very transformational part of my own life as you've familiarized and immersed me in the teachings of Islam, but also as your concepts of social justice are so intertwined with your faith ethics, and then as those embrace economic ethics, sociological ethics, community ethics. And so the opportunity to exchange some views today is something that motivated me to remember that you have this ability to touch and transform. And on the other hand, this particular show also, I know my friends at Airlangga University in Surabaya, who have the privilege of occasionally watching your show, were touched by the last interview we had, in recognition and celebration of the bridges we're attempting to build. And I think we will succeed through communities of belief in each other, but also informed by higher authority than just academic.
I must share with you, Dr. Lanigan, that we first met approximately 17 to 19 years ago, and you do not look a day older. Actually, you look younger. Is it all about the peace and the love and the traveling that you do, the connection, the connecting of people? You know, when you connect to people with your heart and from your heart, it really brings a different love and a different sort of youth into you.
Well, that
and
youth,
I can see that in you.
That youth to describe, maybe you got the wrong prescription at the eye doctor.
But, I got that. I like that.
But the truth in your observation is that I think many of us who understand a higher being in our lives look at each day in terms of is that higher being in my life done using me or not? And if I wake up and realize, nope, I'm not finished being useful in the eyes of Allah or my God or however I describe that beautiful presence in my life, then I've got places to go and things to do.
I think that
and I think that's a source.
God Almighty has a lot for you to do. That's why He keeps you looking younger. You know, I still remember when we met in Washington.
That's correct.
And I'm telling you, and I'm telling you, I'm not kidding. You really look the very same way that we met 17 years ago in Washington.
Well, thank you for that. I think the energy also comes from the role that I know both you and I play as educators. One of the things I feel very strongly about is that we are not quantifiable grade point averages. We're not quantifiable IQs. We are, in effect, each a unique description, distinction, addition and application of our different dominant intelligences, of which there are 9. And there's probably more. But within the spectrum, at the one end of the spectrum, you find basically musical intelligence, and you find logical intelligence, and then you get to environmental and then spiritual intelligence. And the fact is that this wonderful brain that we've had the privilege, each of us, to enjoy, has that different manifestation to the degree to which we're engaged with each other. Maybe
Excellent,
people,
excellent.
Serving people,
Definitely.
arriving at peace, or likewise, if we're really prevented from arriving. In other words, the most poor person in the world is the person who's got to resort to power instead of engagement, because if we're bankrupt, then you go with the ethic, might makes right, which is really not an ethic. It's a dead end where you're trapped. And so as educators, stimulating those different parts, like here at your studio, and I noticed the ping pong gamesmanship and the other devices to encourage people, even as they're encountering the spiritual dimensions, but also practical service in the community. You're doing that here as a role model.
Thank
and
you.
so that's part of the celebration.
We
I
want our
find.
guests to feel at home. We want them to feel at home, to feel welcome, and to be part of the big family. Now, I know you really got an interesting life story, your experiences. So I don't want to get back into all the details.
No.
But what were you involved in before you started as a professor lecturing on different subject matters? What were you really involved in the United Nations? You spent
Well,
some time. So what was that all about?
As I tell my students, this is my 7th career. And sometimes they think, oh my goodness, maybe he can't keep a job.
Oh. And
then I always say, don't get burned out, get fired up. And so the first position I had the privilege of having, a really accidental one, or I like to think perhaps inspired by something more than me, was an opportunity to serve as a very young member of a staff heading up an organization related to the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations, Alberto Giovannetti, who was the first.
You left Chicago, where you were born and where you grew up and studied, and you moved to New York, or were you traveling?
I went to Georgetown University for 4 years to acquire a degree in nonviolent civil rights participation. Oh, but my official degree was in the School of Foreign Service, but working within the King organization, and in particular the Center for Creative Nonviolence, participating in civil disobedience. Because as Dr. King would have said, and he did say, you have the right to protest for the right, but it doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you.
Yes.
But you have to demonstrate the power of peace through your involvement there. And while acquiring a degree in foreign service, I discovered that my real interest
so maybe
was creating.
That's why you love traveling, because you got a degree in foreign service. So you got to go to the foreign lands and you got to connect.
And at Georgetown, I had the privilege of working 3 summers in Mexico, again connecting people to peace through service under the auspices of the First Lady of Mexico, in an effort to get the students of the National University to replace all the American volunteers who were supporting her National Institute to Protect Infants. But
So what was this all about in details that you guys had to literally do or practically when you were at the United Nations?
Well, at the United Nations, again, my first regular job after Georgetown University was essentially I was responsible for gathering in the international Catholic movement for intellectual and cultural affairs in North America. And I had counterparts in Asia, South America, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa.
Wow.
And in North America, that consisted of carrying a red passport and visiting many military dictatorships to get people engaged in social justice out of jail and to get them to international conferences, either in Spain, in Switzerland, or in Italy. Because that time, think of the 1960s, Cold War, and some of the brighter people, the Paulo Freires of the world, the Juan Luis Segundos of the Western Hemisphere, and so on. And then, of course, the beautiful people with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who occasionally likewise enjoyed some attention from an international group.
Basically, you were a diplomat.
You could describe it, but at a very low level. Meaning, in other words,
at a low level in the eyes of politicians, but at a very high level in the eyes of God and humanity.
I would accept that. Okay, but I think but that's the important point.
Yeah, because people may look at that from a political point of view as well, not very.
He wasn't representing the State Department,
right?
you
But
know.
when it comes to God and humanity and a service,
I'd like to
that
think
was
so.
very high.
No, thank you for that
That was very
interpretation.
blessed. I think that was very unique.
But
And
it
God
was,
opened many roads for you from that.
and that's why sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump, walking through pieces of history. But I did stop and try to make a contribution in each piece.
Of course, but do you know what, Dr. Lenigan? A lot of people start down here and get up to the United Nations from university. You started from the United Nations as your first job. I think that is very phenomenal.
But
That's really unique.
But I've got to insist, it wasn't because my mother was rich and my father was good looking. It was seeing an opportunity in which a person with my particular characteristics and education, not a straight A student, would be useful in that kind of work.
I think that's a lot of vision, dynamism, blessings from God, most of all, that
Thank you.
started from that point. I mean, there are not many people that will tell you that their first job is the United Nations. It doesn't matter what it is you do at the United Nations. There are not many people out of university, their first job is United Nations. So you were very blessed. That opened, the world became very small for you. And that's why you have traveled. I'm amazed when I look at your biography and I see that you have traveled to the Philippines, to Australia, to Indonesia, to India, to South America. You have conquered South America, all these different islands. Would you like to share with our audience? Because, we're on this show called Global Issues. And one of the major issue that we like to focus on in al-hikmat is all about love and peace and different faiths and cultures coming together, better understanding, tolerance, working together, agreeing to disagree. We love that kind of thing, and we really love that. And I really admire your efforts and your sacrifice and your travels when it comes to global peace, love for humanity. And this project that you have been into, could you share with our audience what is called seeking, or for want of a better word, the peace, the love missions that you have been traveling to different countries on?
With regard to service for peace?
Service for peace.
Yes, that particular concept, connecting people to peace through service, a very
Connecting
simple
people to peace
through
through service.
service.
That's it.
was a very simple concept that originated in the year 2000 here in Miami, when in fact at the college a number of people who had been doing community service projects among my students had suggested, why not dedicate 2 or 3 weeks to a group of as many as 35 high school students working with voluntary college students,
Okay.
and each of whom connected to various religious enterprises, religious communities of faith, as in Islam, as in Baptist tradition in the Christian community, as in Judaism, as in Buddhism, as in also Hindu and Sikhism. And I thought it was such a novel idea, and so many people thought, oh, that's not possibly going to work. That's too complicated. But we didn't basically, and Harold Silva, a dear friend of mine, and I think you've met him on a couple occasions, basically said, just because something hasn't been done doesn't mean it's not possible.
Of
Bottom
course, I
line,
like that. I like
at
that.
At the end of that summer, having both done projects that involved various tenets of different people's faith community, whether it was social justice here or exceptionality to be embraced there. At the end of the first summer, it was decided, let's do this again. In the process...
And this was in Miami.
This was in Miami. But in the process, 2 of the students who had participated went back to the Dominican Republic, where a very fine man had just completed his term as president of the Dominican Republic, named Leonel Fernandez, who was, as his constitution required, not holding the presidency, and for 4 years wanted to do some special things in the Dominican Republic, one of which was to introduce service, connecting people to peace through service among his different communities through public education and the public university. The Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo, they call it UAST down there.
So some of your students, I know I'm going to jump around with
No,
you
no, this
here
is good.
because I'm looking at what our viewers there thinking and what they probably want to ask you as you're
Sure.
talking. So the subject that you teach at
At the college,
at Miami-Dade College was political analysis,
political science, but
political
also
science,
multicultural communication and relations.
multicultural
Communication and relations.
So among your students, you probably have students right now, as you were saying, who are heavily involved in politics.
Oh, very much, and with all parties.
You have students who are highly involved in both parties and many parties, and maybe foreign countries also.
That is also true. And
That's
so it was with that connection where President Fernandez wanted to introduce Model UNs to his country. So they created a Model UN Association of the Dominican Republic, but closely approximating what we were doing at the college. And then with service learning. And then, of course, as he went on, became president again, things became more official, and they've actually better than when they started. Their model is now the model. In a nonprofit organization called Service for Peace, or Servicio para la Paz, Servir por la Paz, in other words, in different languages, which is not only in the Dominican Republic and in the United States, in a number of locations, but at one point as far also as Nepal, Kenya.
So Miami-Dade College got students from all these different countries?
We have students at the college from 187 countries.
Wow.
It's more internationally representative than any other school in the United States, actually.
So you have probably got students who have passed through your hands, as we would say.
Mm-hmm.
And in their countries, you probably don't even know what different positions they got. They're probably very much elevated into different political positions.
That's also part of what's exciting. And on the one hand, I generally hear. I don't personally use Facebook or social media, but the
But
wonderful
do you recognize
students.
some of these students that passed through your teachings and they are now in different governments worldwide?
Prime Minister of Curacao, as a Deputy Education, Kenya, UN headquarters for development in Singapore. In other words, the answer is yes. And then I also attempt to, if I ever write you a letter of reference, not that you'd need one, but if one of my students does, I'll say there's 3 requirements. Number 1, succeed. My name's on the letter for a scholarship or for a university posting or your first job. Number 2, come back and tell others how you did it. Because most of my students, it's the first time in higher education.
Wow.
Most of my students, depending on the part of the world they're from, this is a new, they can't imagine some of them changing the world. And then number 3, tell others there's more where you came from. So this year,
like
as I
that.
have students
I
at
like that.
Yale, London School of Economics, Charles University in the Czech Republic, University of Tokyo, as well as 131 schools in this country, it's a
Wow.
network that says spend money on people that come from that place, because look at what the ones who came first have done. And then as that works around the world, our president, I know you've met Eduardo Padron, that's part of his genius. Letting people, not getting them to fit in, you can take a test for that, but getting them to stand out, take a risk, an informed and an ethical risk. And so that's been part of the dynamic besides what did you learn, how can you prove it, show me on an exam. It's about social engagement and our commitment to making change makers. Very much
I like those topics, political science and cultural relationship. That's interesting. That's why you have this drive. I mean, that's not just the reason, but that also contributes towards your drive and your energy in connecting people to peace through service worldwide. So basically, when you go to Australia, like you've been to Australia recently, all right, or when you go to some of these other countries on this mission, what do you do when you go across there?
Now you sound like my wife. She says, what's wrong with this letter? You and other Islamic scholars are invited to Mindanao to do, and she said, now I know Shaikh Shafayat has helped you learn a lot, but you're not a scholar, and so on. And my answer to my wonderful wife is, the question is, what do they think I can do? And so if it's operating, demonstrating some approaches to realizing social justice as it applies to certain circumstances in Cagayan de Oro or some of the places in Mindanao, if I'm a useful outside irritant, or I like to think contributor, not an irritant, then that's good enough for me. Because people I know and trust and whose beautiful faith I have such a high and beautiful regard for are inviting me to possibly be useful. Wow. That's what I do. So to answer your question, nuts and bolts. Last week in Costa Rica at the meeting of the Earth Charter group under UNESCO's auspices, there were scientists on climate change. There were incredible people on relationships with nature and human and non-human species. And so mine was the last session because people brighter than I really understand better than I how the world works. But nuts and bolts. So if you think I'm nuts, you can bolt. That's a joke.
I like that.
But how do you build into your strategy, educational strategy, but let's not make it boring. We'll call it empowerment strategy, to build on this person's musical strength to get the message across between fossil fuel and pollution. This person's wonderful engineering capacity to figure out how to engage solar power more effectively. That wonderful Indian gentleman who just wrote that book, Harnessing the Sun, Varun Seth, I believe is his name. And I had to get a chance to meet him. And he said, this is like Broadway. And he says, I'm the star. And there's the investors. That we were in one room with people who had advanced his thesis. And he said, and I want to share this new technology. I said, you know what's missing? He said, on Broadway, investors, star, theater. I said, the audience. You need some educators to help us understand the genius you just exposed us to. Right. And so, not necessarily me, but connecting people who can help other people understand and make their own judgments. It's not like a ideology.
Realistically speaking, that's what the world is all made up of.
It can be.
That's how God, God needed no one and needs no one.
I agree.
To create his universe and his sun and the when I say sun, the sun and the moon and but us human beings as the creation, that's how we were designed by God, that we need all the different components of different people to connect, to make all these things happen. You can be the greatest genius on a certain matter. You don't have the audience.
Right.
You don't have the clients. You don't have the customers. You're all alone. So it's a whole combination of strength. Now, in your travels to these places, India and Philippines and Australia, how did people respond when you go? I know I ask you what do you do when you go, but what is the response like in some cases?
Okay, you know me. Sometimes the shortest distance between where you are and where you want to be is laughter. So in India, which is one of my favorite examples, because in Coimbatore, in Tamil Nadu, at the university there, Avanashilingam deemed the first deemed women's university after Gandhi. In other words, women empowered in higher education. Some of the most clever people I've ever met in the world were there.
Wow.
It's for women of really very lower economic means, but of no limit to genius. But, so how did they call me a resident scholar.
I'm sure your experience would have been a great level of learning, huh?
I absolutely, I almost felt guilty because of so much of what I got. I hoped I had contributed, but
Wow.
also what I received. So, but again, the sense of humor in Australia, at Charles Sturt University, which is in the province, New South Wales state down there. They also have 8 campuses like Miami-Dade does, and a lot of things. But their interaction with these beautiful Aboriginal people that they're finally acknowledging in different ways, very differently than we've managed to arrive at our own beautiful Native American people. But likewise, the awkwardness, the injustices among these beautiful original land keepers, in other words, the original people there before everybody arrived from the empire and so on. They've got this beautiful set of relationships, many of which haven't been adequately empowered by the universities in terms of best practices that might be okay with Aboriginals, but the Aboriginals' contribution to this incredible Charles Sturt University was incomplete. So on the one hand, I get to go, I get to listen, I get to observe, and then react.
So how long you spent in Australia?
Australia, that was only 2 weeks, and but I'm not the guy with a bag of tricks that can solve anything. I'm the person who says, wow, did you see how that relates to this? And unless I'm mistaken, and so that's what was exciting to be there, because the Aussies are really conscientiously improving their relationship with their own country in terms of the environment, but to the people who know it best, which are the Aboriginal.
Of course, that's a whole different world. Listen,
It
India
is.
is a different world. Australia is a different world. America is a different world. You know what, Dr. Lanigan, we have been talking for approximately 25 minutes. Interesting. And there's so much more to learn from you, but we have to go on a short break.
Sure.
And when we come back, I would love to hear you share some of your suggestions, your recommendations to our viewers worldwide on, how we can better really connect people to peace through service, through love, through the message of God, whatever means we can use to connect people to peace, because you're a man with that background, with that experience, with that sort of travel. And I mean, I must tell you that God has really blessed you. You have always, from the first day I met you 17 plus years ago, there's been a connection. We really connected. We did connect. And we have kept that connection. We don't get to meet all the time, but we have that connection. And I'll have to pick you up on my trips abroad. I may have to, if I'm going to Dominica and going to Honduras and going to wherever I'm going again, whether it be Australia or Indonesia, I'll have to ask you for your contacts. You may have to put that recommendation, because I may know one people or one type of people in one walk of life, but the kind of people and the kind of students that you have who are in different walks of life in some of these countries might just be unique to meet them. I would love to meet them, and just to be connected to Dr. Michael Lanigan, and I'm connecting to some people in some other country in the world, because you're a man who are really peacefully connected by God, and I think it's by God.
I would enjoy that halo effect of your presence in anybody's life that I know.
Thank you very much. I really will have to contact you before I go. You never can tell who is your connection and which country we travel in, because so many students. How many countries you said? 187 countries. You have students at Miami-Dade College, so you never can tell who is where and what they're doing, and that's the bond and connection that we're all about in spreading peace and living as this one big grand family of humanity. So thank you very much again, and when we come back after the short break, we're going to continue this conversation with Dr. Michael Lanigan, so he can share some words of advice and recommendations for peace and love and connection with other people of different faiths and cultures. Thank you.
Al-Hikmat Services, serving the Muslim community and non-Muslim community. Dawah and interfaith activities, distribution of Quran and Islamic publications, sponsoring students to study Islam, Al-Hikmat Da'i, Dawah and Interfaith Institute. Also, Friday sermons by Shaikh Shafayat are live on alhikmattv.com from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Download our free Al-Hikmat TV app on your mobile devices. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to donate to Al-Hikmat Dawah services online with a credit card or PayPal at alhikmat.com. For more details, contact Al-Hikmat office at 1-800-804-0267 or our local number 954-986-0158 and visit us at www.alhikmat.com. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Global Issues on Al-Hikmat TV 24/7 online. Again, it's a pleasure to have with us in Al-Hikmat studio Dr. Michael Lanigan, a professor at MDC, Miami-Dade College. We have been speaking before we went on the break a lot about his travels and his experience and his involvement in peace worldwide. So welcome again, Dr. Michael.
Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Before we get down into some of your recommendations and suggestions to how best people should connect and how we could connect people to peace through services, tell us a little bit about, your college, Miami-Dade College, and your interfaith experience, whether from the college, with students, your involvement with students of different faiths, your interfaith connections, whether in America or worldwide. Share a little bit about that.
Yes, every day I go to have the privilege of being among my different scholar communities. I call my students scholars because they're exploring and advancing. They're not just exchanging information. And one of the joys of doing that is in any given class, some of my classes are as small as 17 and some as large as 40, essentially emphasizing what each person brings to enrich our experience together. So rather than what's your name, what's your major, what have you, which is a more traditional approach.
Yes.
I basically inquire to the extent to which anyone wants to share what motivates them, what's the highest source of their motivation, what's their greatest source of pride so far in their life, and then what's their greatest challenge. And for the most part, in almost every setting, some earlier and some eventually, and there's no formula, basically as people share what's at their core. Now, you might say, well, have you ever run into an atheist? And the answer is sure, they've got spirituality as well, but less defined in terms of specific tenets and sources of annotated, if you will, divine intervention in their life. But in that process, creating an environment in which it's safe, it's comfortable to share. It's okay to ask a Seventh-day Adventist, what's that about your seventh day and everyone else's? Or it's okay to ask a member of the Hindu community, does holy cow, is everybody limited to staying away from beef? Because I hear there's people who are Hindi in Indonesia that eat beef. And so you can feel free also to ask about other aspects of the culture, be it music, be it faith, be it rituals, be it other beautiful things that we all have. But sometimes some of us, whether we're new in the United States, which many of my students are, or if we've just been invisible in American culture until coming into this particular classroom, try to identify that as a source of both beauty and a source of distinction, and then also acceptance, even though you may be the only one, you may be the only nomadic tribesman in my class who has animistic values. And so part of that is creating that kind of environment, and then also allowing not just the faculty or the convener, but the other members to be cherished as legitimate
because
inquiry.
You may have a lot of people talking peace. You may have a lot of people talking unity. But among these people, they just may not tolerate people of other faiths. You follow what I'm saying? And
Oh,
I've
totally.
seen that. I've seen that, Dr. Lanigan.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people, they love peace. They said, let's live together, let us unite, let us talk peace. But these very same people who want peace, they do not make the effort to understand other people's religion, other people's faiths, other people's culture. So how are you going to have peace when you don't understand the other person? You don't trust the other person. You don't believe that you should work together with the other person. You want peace to exist, but there
Right.
is no connection. You know, there is no connection. It's like you want this bulb to light, but there is no connection. There is no connection. How are you going to get light? And I see this happening in my, 40 plus years of experience in travels throughout the world and interfaith and striving for peace with communities. Whenever we don't understand someone else and we don't try to understand their faith and their culture, not only the culture, but their beliefs, because a person's belief is very important. They believe or they don't believe is important. Because
right.
based on that, we will know how to interact and how to connect and how to make that peaceful connection, because you might be the most loving guy, the most loving person trying to connect with someone, and you are breaking a major tradition in that person's religion and belief. So now you have built a wall between that relationship instead of bridging a gap of love and peace. So it can only happen when you understand other people. So how do you see that happening? And people, especially in colleges and
Sure.
schools and universities, wherever it may be, people got to understand this. And I see it happening in governments also, in parliaments, in Congress, in the Senate. If these people don't respect another person's religion, now these things have started becoming a problem in trying to communicate and understand each other's discussion.
No, and at a very basic level, you cannot escape one of my classes without three things. And service learning. That's a voluntary act in the community related to the course content as a project. So again, working with people out in terms of anything from organizing after school childcare or in a park improvement project, but with the same people you're in class with, creates another dynamic. Although it's only required for 15 hours, usually it ends up being much longer because people realize, I'm also not only finding out what's missing from the government, this is why we have voluntary projects, but the person I'm working with who is so different than me isn't that different. Number two, you also can't escape my courses without an orientation and a explanation of how earth ethics applies to behavior as simple as throwing away a straw or using solar energy or not abuse. And then, but my belief system and yours both feels like we need to preserve the earth and not dominate it and throw it away. And then the other piece that, again, you can't escape, I like to say enriched, but I'll be honest, some people feel like, I can't escape that, is geography. In other words, as Americans, I sadly report we are the most geo-illiterate people in the world. Most of my students who come from other countries have had geography 3 times before getting out of high school. In the United States, you're lucky if you run into it after high school. But working on projects that require hand-drawn, why not use a computer? Mind, neurosystems, you're ingraining the map, but then the cultures and then the consultation with the other people in the class. Where are they from? Why are these cultures? How many Eskimos have bikinis? How many people in Jamaica have fur coats? In other words, all these different facets have to do with geography, not even solely faith or not solely culture, but the cultures have been shaped by that. And the greater, beautiful system of faith is what informs us as to what we could be, should be, ought to be doing in our different
That's such a
environments.
powerful point you made there, because just to begin with the geographical settings speaks a lot about a person's culture. And that is without even getting into their real
Right.
lifestyle, culture, religion, and belief. Just the geographical settings will change their appearance and their dress code. That's interesting.
Other interventions. That's why I like to think my classes are an adventure, as well as some of the programs I do with different organizations, and like some of which you and I have done in the past.
That's
Peace-
why I love cultural diversity so much. You know, the two subjects that you master,
fit.
political science and cultural diversity and cultural relationship. I love that. I really do love that. I love those topics and I love those subjects.
And you know
And
what?
I enjoy talking to you about that.
You know who I borrow from? A gentleman from India, actually, Prem Rawat. I have permission to use his peace education program in a sub-curriculum, 8 units of a 64-unit class, having to do with self-disclosure and then a disclosure of one's values and the environment. It originally came out of a prison education program led by Prem Rawat with regard to identifying from within as well as divinely from within, but also personally from within in different faith communities. Those sacred powers that each of us has, but many of us don't pay attention to, and then how that works through cultures, and then how that allows me to be a change agent, first of all in my own life. That's why it started in the prison community, but I was the first one to use it in higher education in the world. He'd been using it around the world in
India
jails.
But you would agree with me in your experience and connections. India is a very unique place. Unique
very
country, unique people. You can find different people of different walks of life really beyond your imagination in India. I mean, all different types. Anything you think about, you can find there.
But you can also find the multicultural, as you correctly
Yeah,
identified.
that's what I'm saying. Everything.
But that starts from within. I mean, in other words, so the Muslim faith, as it's expressed in India, the Jains, the Hindus, the Sikhs, and so on, but that I call it sacred spirituality at the center of in one's community, but also one's individual faith interpretation, becomes a very incredible orienting ground then to handle other information, self-development, education. So we use this 8-week, fairly simple introduction, but what it gets in conversation among my students is something very different than I would ever get walking through the family, religion, and education, walking through economics and so on. But if we're talking about the social environment, the focus is the sociability of the people in the environment. And so we use that peace education program therein. So what I guess in responding to your question, I try to inject as many interactive, individual scholar originating energies and contributions that then help me refine the objectives I have and I'm responsible for as tools for people in my class to make politics work, to make institutions in society to work, to make their own and other cultures more embraceable or less.
Which automatically includes their faith, of course.
Absolutely. Right? Because again, that's really, I find, at the center of the vast majority of all my students.
Yeah.
And unawakened in some of the others. But I tell my students, when I came to Miami, I was FBI. And of course, they kind of worry about that. Some of them may have different challenges. Foreign-born Irish, meaning my culture out of Chicago was very ethnocentric, whatever. Since being in Miami, I'm CIA. What does that mean? Caribbean, Irish American. I know who I am. That's the Irish part, but I can embrace these other cultures. And so therefore I've become not anything less or diluted, but everything plus. And so therefore embracing your religious values that manifest everything from music to the way in which Ohala, or the way in which Salam Alaikum, or the way in which you encounter me, Namaste, enriches and empowers both of us, but it also informs us how to be more effective and learning
Definitely.
and serving.
Definitely.
So it's faith-centered.
So, Dr. Michael Lanigan, as a professor of political science, cultural relationship, a man who has traveled all over the world, India, Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Lebanon, Africa, you name it, you have been there. If I call all these countries and we begin talking about where you've been and what you've experienced, we will need another show to get on that. But with all of that experience and your geographical background and foreign educational background on different countries and everything, what would you say to our viewers? We got just a couple seconds to conclude. We have already been speaking for 45 minutes or so. Yeah, within the first segment and now. What would you tell, what would I say? People of all faiths, you know, our viewers, we got viewers of all different faiths on our program. It's not just a Muslim, not just Muslim viewers. We got people from different countries worldwide and people of different faiths who look at our show. So what would you tell all these people in just a few words, in 30 seconds, if I want to put it, as to how they should build bridges, bring down walls, and keep this peace, this fraternity, this love amongst ourselves as humankind? In 30 seconds.
Be
what
a
do you say?
loving curiosity seeker. Don't let anyone be a stranger. Arrival in Australia, and the first day I spent time in 5 communities, at one mosque, at one gurudwara, at one church, at one synagogue, asking if, as a world traveler, could I share in that community each day as a total stranger.
Wow.
On the other hand, in engaging people, if you're an engineer or I'm a lawyer or what have you, what different faiths have contributed to the traditions in our profession, and then what luxury of diversity from Quranic law, from canonical law, from civil law and so on strengthens us, and what are the beliefs behind that? Be curious, and then not to let anyone be a stranger just because you can suspect by their body language, or you can suspect by their attitude, or something they've said. Don't leave them alone. Give me the privilege of what you see that I'm missing, or that maybe what I haven't shared adequately, so we can be friends.
I like that. Thank you very much. It has really been a pleasure to have you with us on the show. I have learned so much. I feel like I've been sitting in one of your classes at Miami-Dade College. I've learned so much from your experience, your love, your vision, your affection for peace, your sacrifice and your effort, and your travels throughout the world. You know, that is really unique. As I said during this course, many people start here and end up working with the United Nations. Your man came out of university and started working first at the United Nations. So you've been blessed in all different ways. So thank you very much for being on the show. It has really been a blessing to have you with us. And we would love you to come back to discuss some other aspects. And may God bless you, and may God continue to guide you and guide us all on the right path, and so that you could continue to share this knowledge and wealth of experience that you have with people of all different cultures and different faiths. So again, viewers, it has been a pleasure to have with us on Global Issues on Al-Hikmat TV, Dr. Michael Lanigan, a professor at Miami-Dade College, and as you have heard on the show, different walks of life, experience, etc. It has been a pleasure to have you view this program, and stay tuned 24/7 to Al-Hikmat TV for a wide variety of shows that we got. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much.
Allah